All right, so everybody, my special guest tonight for the Candidates Corner is Mr. Tim Canova, as you know. As stated before, he's an American politician, a law professor specializing in banking and finance. Canova is currently seeking to represent Florida's 23rd Congressional District, challenging the incumbent Democratic National Committee Chair, Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz. And this day, now you guys need to mark this on your calendar, August 30th, 2016. That's when his primary election will be held. So guys, give it up for my friend and yours, the hope of the future. All of his resting on his shoulders. I'm just joking, but yes, a lot of people have high hopes. A man full of promise, Tim Canova. Hey, Tim, how you doing, sir? Glad to have you. How are you?
I'm tired, but, we're fighting it out every day here. No rest for the weary.
No rest for the... I hear you, man. I hear you. So how's the campaign going, man? You said you're tired. You just got off the campaign trail. What's going on?
It's been going great. I mean, the campaign is building, but we're really right down to the wire now. In 2 weeks, it's the deadline for folks to register Democrat because it's a closed primary, which is, of course, a difficult primary to be in because so many of the younger voters who are independent, not affiliated with the party, they have to register Democrat, and a lot of folks are not in the mood to register Democrat. But I'm hoping here in our district, a lot of folks do. So that deadline is in 2 weeks. Absentee ballots go out in the mail in about 2 weeks, and a lot of folks here in this district actually vote by mail, absentee. So, we're down to the wire, and we're working hard every day, and we have a great ground game, and, things are looking good.
That's fantastic, Tim. And guys, I don't think a lot of people watching were aware that it was a closed primary, maybe people who live in Florida. So that truly is an uphill battle. But Tim, before we get into like the meat and bones of the issues and your policy points, I'd like to ask you, sir, what brought you to politics? Like, what's driving you to want to do this?
Well, I've never run for an elective office before, and yet I've been involved in other people's campaigns for years and in some grassroots advocacy campaigns over the years. Never thought I was going to run for office. And, for me, it's not a career. I really feel like I was just called to it. And Bernie Sanders did a lot of the calling, to tell you the truth. Not literally. He never called me up. But like everyone, I was listening to Bernie last year, and he was calling for a political revolution. He was calling for people to step up. And at the same time, I was lobbying, with the citizens group, the Citizens Trade Campaign. We were trying to lobby the congressional delegation here against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And my congresswoman, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, voted to fast-track the agreement. And, that's when it occurred to a lot of us that, we were excited about Bernie. We thought he had a really great chance to get elected. And it just seemed like even if lightning strikes and Bernie gets elected, he's got to have a Congress he could work with. And it really inspired me to step up and challenge her.
Wow, that's so refreshing. Just your, the story behind you getting involved in this, like you feel like you were called to it, man. That is the best, guys. Let's give it up for Tim Canova on that. That's the best reason to run, frankly. I see here that you have a history with Bernie Sanders. That you worked with him on his financing, Federal Reserve reform.
Yeah, I'm a law professor, and for a lot of years, for more years than I care to admit, I was writing articles, writing book chapters, writing editorials that were critical of Wall Street and the deregulation of Wall Street, and of course, not really getting much recognition. We were certainly working against the tide at the time, and after the financial collapse occurred in 2008, things started changing a little bit. And in 2010, I started working with not just Bernie's office, but a couple of other members of Congress. Again, just as a law professor, advising them on the Dodd-Frank Act, or the legislation that would become the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Act. And about a year after that, I got a call from Bernie Sanders' office asking if I would be on a special advisory committee on reforming the Federal Reserve. And of course, I said yes, and it was an interesting experience. There were a lot of great economists on that committee, excuse me, including Joseph Stiglitz and Robert Reich and James Galbraith and Jeffrey Sachs and a bunch of others. And we were charged with studying the Federal Reserve and how it should be reformed. And we met with Ben Bernanke, and I certainly didn't see eye to eye with Ben Bernanke. He was the Federal Reserve Chairman at the time. But, we did our best, and Bernie did introduce some legislation after that. The legislation did not get very far, but maybe next year I'll be in a position to help Bernie further if I'm elected.
I hear you. Well, we definitely look, actually, just to be completely honest, man, you had us when you said, yeah, you worked with Bernie before. And then when you said Robert Reich, it was like a cherry on top of the cake, I'm pretty sure for most people. I'm looking at some of the... Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
No, I'm just agreeing with you. That's a good company to be in.
It is, man, excellent company. And you're being positioned, and some people, I was reading a HuffPost article, they said that Tim Canova is like Bernie Sanders' proxy candidate for Bernie or something. They're really putting you in some big shoes.
Well, I think this is an interesting time in history, and I do think we're all being called upon to step up and to stand up and to do things that we wouldn't have thought we would do. I never thought I'd run for a political office. Right. There are millions of people around this country who have been getting involved, again, also running for office, but also helping folks, donating money, donating time, and it's made all the difference to my campaign. I haven't taken a single penny from any corporate interests, and it was a vow that I made when I jumped into the race, and of course, again, inspired by Bernie.
Let's stay there for a minute, Tim. You don't take super PAC money, and you don't take money from Wall Street. Yeah. This is something I've been comparing your credentials to the incumbent, and I don't understand.
Yeah,
it's like night and day, Tim. Lord,
it is.
Payday loans, and TPP.
You are really plated. What's that, Tim?
I said, no, I was just going down a list of things. And please expand. Like, I just don't understand how you're not knocking this out the box. What is going on? What is the barrier? Just getting your name out there or what?
Well, yes, of course. We've raised a lot of money, and it's been coming in nationally from small donations all over the country and all over the state. But Wasserman Schultz starts with a great advantage, which is she's got very high name recognition. She counts, of course, on low voter turnouts every election cycle. She's never faced a primary challenger. And it really is, emblematic of the problem here in Florida. This is the bluest district in the state, and Broward County is the bluest county in the state, and yet we have among the lowest voter turnouts in the state. And again, it's because people don't see the point of voting when, the incumbent is never challenged in a primary. And this has been to Wasserman Schultz's advantage. So, and I must admit, I even voted for her 2 years ago in the general election. It was a choice between her and a very right-wing Republican. And most of this district, to the degree they have voted at all, they have voted for her in the past. So, part of it is just habit. She also presents herself as a firebrand liberal, and people don't realize that behind her fiery rhetoric, her denouncing of Donald Trump, her support for some good issues, rights for women and for gays and lesbians. I have no disagreement with her on those issues, but behind that, she's really a corporate-dominated politician, a real insider. And in the course of her career, she's taken millions of dollars from the largest corporations and Wall Street banks, and she's been pushing their interests and really ignoring the interests of her own constituents down here.
As a finance guy, when you are against, I understand you're against the TPP, like strongly against the TPP. Could you explain her position and your position, the differences between the two?
Sure. Well, I don't know all the reasons for her position because she really hasn't articulated them much. And in fact, I teach at the only law school in her district, Nova Southeastern University. I've taught international trade law for many years. And when I tried to get in touch with her office to share my opinion, to share my expertise on it, I really got a brush off. There was no meaningful engagement by anyone in her office. And she ended up voting to fast track it, and she didn't really give much of a rationale for it. So I don't know exactly where she's coming from, and you rarely do. The biggest clue as to where she's coming from is that in the last election cycle, she raised $330,000 from corporate groups that support the TPP. That's usually how you could tell where she's going to come down on a vote, is where she's been raising money. For me, I look at the TPP, and I see a very bad trade deal. It will outsource millions of American jobs and tens of thousands of jobs in South Florida. It will raise prescription drug prices, in part because it's the big corporations, including big pharmaceutical companies, that negotiated this agreement without the involvement and participation of members of Congress. And then, very troubling to me is a provision that I've been studying for many years. It's been in the North American Free Trade Agreement and in many bilateral investment treaties, and it's known as the Investor State Dispute Settlement Provisions. It's an investor rights provision which allows big investors, big corporations, it would allow them to sue the U.S. government to seek compensation for expected loss of future profits from the cost of complying with regulations, health and safety, food labeling, environmental regulations, you name it. And this is not a theoretical matter because I mentioned NAFTA has a similar provision. And just some months ago, the energy giant TransCanada announced it was suing the U.S. government and seeking $15 billion in compensation for President Obama's decision to not move forward with the Keystone XL pipeline because of climate change reasons. So it effectively would shift the cost of complying with environmental and health and safety laws from corporations to us, the taxpayers. So it's a terrible agreement. And then you even look at the countries that are involved in the agreement. And you've got Brunei, where they practice Sharia law. And, in Brunei, homosexuality, for instance, is punishable by death, by stoning. In Brunei, a husband can rape his wife as long as she's over the age of 13. Malaysia is not much better. It's one of the leading countries in the world in human trafficking and sex trafficking. I just think it's a terrible trade deal.
Wow. It sounds horrendous that we would have to pay, or we could be sued, that the average taxpayer would have to pay money just for them to meet our environmental concerns here in the United States.
Yeah, conservatives had wanted to enshrine this principle in our own domestic law. The Constitution says that the government has to pay just compensation to us when it takes our property. And 20, 30 years ago, there were conservatives in this country, especially in the legal academy, who were seeking to adopt a doctrine called the regulatory takings doctrine, which would be whenever the government actually regulates your use of property, it should be deemed a taking of your property, requiring the government to pay just compensation for you to comply with the regulations. Okay. And they really wanted to get this adopted as a matter of constitutional law, and it hasn't happened yet on the scale that they'd like. So they went around the Constitution and they enshrined this in trade and investment agreements, international agreements, and they're getting their way by this end run around the Constitution.
Yeah, I totally agree with your position on it. Most of my viewers do. We've talked about it, but never really had it broken down quite the way you did, Mr. Canova. Thank you for that.
No, you're very welcome.
I'd like to ask you about these payday loans, because I know not only Debbie Wasserman. I heard her position kind of changed a little bit, but my man Uncle Rush supports it. He has his own payday loan, Rush card. What is the deal with that? Please explain.
So here in Florida, and certainly around the country, it's a problem. But here in Florida, it's a real big problem. There are payday lending companies all over the state, and they prey on very low income and poor people who can't even afford to have a checking account. And they've got to go to these payday loan companies quite often when they're in a pinch. They don't have the money to pay the rent, for instance, or they have a check and they want to cash the check. They go to a check cashing store and they pay over 10% to the store just to cash the check. So the payday loan companies, it's been estimated that the interest rates and fees combined on Florida borrowers, low-income borrowers, is over 300%. And it's a huge problem here. And the Florida Consumer Alliance and the NAACP, all kinds of civil rights and consumer groups have denounced this payday lending law. And Florida's payday lending law traces back to the year 2001 when Wasserman Schultz was in the state legislature, and she helped pass that law at the state level. Now you fast forward to 2016, and she co-sponsored a Republican bill in the House that would prevent President Obama's Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. This is the bureau that was created by the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Act of 2010. Her legislation would prevent that bureau from regulating payday loans. And she has tried to defend this position as one that is helping the poor, that it is giving them access to capital, when all the studies show that these payday loans are draining the poor of any chance of accumulating capital and quite often sending them into the poorhouse. And it became quite an issue. I made it an issue here. And she was on the defensive about it, and the local press was giving her a hard time as well. And then President Obama's Consumer Financial Protection Bureau came out with new regulations that would be applied nationally to the payday loan industry. And Wasserman Schultz, the very next day, said she supported these new regulations. So she realized she was on the losing end. She was getting a lot of criticism. But I will also say that the Bureau's regulations don't go anywhere near far enough. They don't cap interest rates at all. They really just deal cosmetically with the process by which loans are approved. So she's, I think, trying to have it both ways. And I should say during her career, she's taken many tens of thousands of dollars from the payday lending industry. And you take a look behind the payday lending industry. Who's behind it? Well, it's big Wall Street banks that give them the lines of credit. So the big Wall Street banks are profiting from this predatory type of finance. And Wasserman Schultz has taken not tens of thousands of dollars, but hundreds of thousands of dollars from the big Wall Street banks.
Unbelievable. You know,
yeah.
I was looking at an article, and I didn't realize, guys, everyone listening, you need to realize that this payday lending, it really is a spiraling effect on a lot of people. I mean, there was one father, I think he committed suicide because he could never get caught up. It was a big write-up, a big editorial about some of the people, the personal stories of getting trapped in this cycle of trying to get your rent, and then now you owe them this amount of money, and then you gotta get another loan to cover the loan you had, and it's like the dog chasing the tail type of thing. It's really hard.
Absolutely. It's like a debtor's prison that people end up in. It is an awful predatory way of redistributing income from the most vulnerable, to creditor interest, including Wall Street banks. And when Wasserman Schultz says, "Look, these payday loans are better than nothing. They're better than loan sharks." Well, the loan sharks might break your kneecaps. The payday lenders, they've got the law on their side. They'll just deduct it straight from your accounts. They'll repossess your car or whatever other possessions you have. And she talks like there's no other progressive alternatives that we should be talking about. And for years, I've talked about public banking. And, you've got state chartered banks like the Bank of North Dakota is a successful one. But you also look at this country's history. And this is something a lot of folks don't realize. From 1911 to 1967, so from just about Teddy Roosevelt through John Kennedy, this country's postal system had millions of checking accounts for low-income folks. And folks could, therefore conduct simple transactions without getting hosed by predatory lenders. And that system was privatized in the 1960s. And, I've been calling for resurrecting it. So have a lot of other legal scholars. Right. Elizabeth Warren, Senator Warren called for it, and Bernie Sanders as well. So these are progressive alternatives. And, unfortunately, when you've got a corporate-dominated insider like Wasserman Schultz, she won't even talk about those types of alternatives. They're not even on the table.
Yeah, I noticed that was one of the points that they wanted added to the DNC plank, the Democratic plank, and it was shot down. The Postal Service Banking Initiative, I think it was called, but something to that effect. I noticed it didn't pass when they tried to negotiate. Yeah, when they tried to negotiate. But that's the Tower of Wall Street. Absolutely. That's it. What about just switching gears again, guys? I want to get everybody a well-rounded view of Mr. Canova. Tim, mass incarceration. They say that you have very progressive ideas on that. Could you please explain a little?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question.
I heard. Well. Okay. Mass incarceration. I understand you have some very progressive ideas about alleviating it. Yeah. So please explain if you got time.
Yes. So this is another big issue in my campaign. Wasserman Schultz is a drug warrior. She takes money from private prison companies, huge private prison companies, and she has been pushing for private prisons. She pushed for a privatized immigration detention center right here in the district, in Southwest Ranches is the neighborhood. And she takes a lot of money from political action committees for big alcohol, beverage, wine and beer companies, and she calls marijuana a gateway drug. She opposed medical marijuana when it was on the ballot statewide 2 years ago, and it almost passed. It needed 60% of the votes statewide, and it was about 2% short. It's going to come up again this November, another statewide referendum on medical marijuana, and I really do expect it will pass this time. The polls are showing it's pretty good, but you never know. The lobbies will spend a lot of money against it at the end. So I've been very clear where I stand, and I have been for years. I support medical marijuana. I say the federal government should get out of the way and stop trying this war on drugs. It hasn't worked. It's been a failure. Let states and let voters decide their own drug policies. Here in South Florida, Miami-Dade and Broward counties have effectively moved towards decriminalizing possession of small amounts of marijuana, where the police have the discretion to issue summonses for the first 3 offenses for possession of minor amounts. I think this war on drugs, I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't know. It's racially discriminatory in the way it's enforced. We have been locking up way too many young men, mostly African American, Hispanic, and Native American, for using the same drugs that, according to the public opinion surveys, a majority of the American people have used, and probably the last 3 American presidents. And it's just fun. It's not solving anything. It's destroying people's lives. It hampers, mostly young black men for the rest of their lives. It makes it more difficult for them to get jobs, to get loans for education, to vote for the rest of their lives in the state of Florida, for nonviolent convictions. So we should stop treating the drugs like this as a criminal justice problem. It should be seen as a public health problem, and it should be seen as something that adults should have the liberty to make their own informed choices, as long as they're not hurting others. And if they're hurting themselves, then it really has to be seen as a public health and a mental health problem.
Wow. Look, listen to this, guys. Common sense when it comes to marijuana. Wow. Give it up for Tim Canova. Common sense. Drug laws. Well, that's what I'm talking about. And now, everyone should know that Debbie Wasserman Schultz has the support of President Obama, and Biden came to town, and I think he stumped for her as well. So we know that Tim Canova is running up against the establishment. So I'm going to ask you this, Mr. Canova.
Yes.
Tim, what do you feel about people who are talking about Green Party versus Democrats? Do you feel there's any hope for the Democrat Party? I kind of know your answer, but I was asked to ask you that question by CJ from Chicago.
I'm somebody who was a lifelong Democrat for many years, went independent for a couple of years, came back to the Democratic Party. Bernie certainly inspired a lot of folks to come back to the Democratic Party and to fight for progressive reform within the party. Here I am in the middle of a campaign, my own campaign, and, frustrated that Bernie might be falling short, and I don't even want to admit that he has fallen short yet. We still have a convention to go. But feeling frustrated, of course. And, what am I going to do? I'm running in a Democratic primary in a Democratic district, and I'm trying to win this race.
Right.
I understand that there are a lot of folks who might be leaving the party. I'll say, please don't leave the party here in South Florida before August 30th, when I am in this re-election. This election campaign. Our primary date is August 30th. I am hopeful that I will be beating Wasserman Schultz, and that I'll be helping Bernie Sanders and other progressives in the House and Senate, in Congress next year, and trying to get progressive reform through. I do not have a crystal ball. I have no idea what's going to happen at the presidential level. And to tell you the truth, I'm trying not to even focus or concentrate on it right now. I've had 65,000 people around the country make donations to my campaign. Average donations are under $17.
Wow.
We've raised almost just about $2.5 million now. I owe it to every single person who donated to me to stay focused on my race, to try to win this race, to not get distracted by the Trump versus Hillary versus Bernie. I understand how heartbreaking it is for a lot of folks who feel cheated, who feel frustrated, but I have had to stay focused on my own race and do the best I can to win this.
You know what, Tim? That is one of the most sincere, most honest, flat out guys. You just got to take it and you got to take it and realize that this man is running his race. Because I've heard the criticisms, Tim, and we've talked offline briefly about it, and I think everything needs to be put in context. The man's running a race. People have donated to his campaign. We're going to cross all bridges when we get to it. But let me say this. Let me ask this, Tim. I know you're aware of some of the concerns people have about Debbie Wasserman as far as her role as the chairwoman, the chairperson, and like the elections, closing of polling places and things of that nature, the number of debates she has refused to debate you. Are you concerned about the voting being above board when you run on election day?
Sure I am. And, we're putting together poll watchers and bringing in our own lawyers and volunteers to try to stay on top of it. It really is a very sad statement of the state of our democracy when we have justifiably reduced confidence in the legitimacy of the outcomes of these elections, in the way votes are actually counted. We should be encouraging high participation rates. You see states like Oregon that have moved in that direction where they have, automatic registration. You see some foreign countries like Australia where I think they fine you if you don't vote. And then you compare it to this country where the voter participation rates are so low, where it's difficult to register and to vote and to have your vote counted sometimes. Who knows how this is going to turn out here. I am just I'd like to beat her so badly that they can't rip us off.
There you go. Look, not even make it close so that there's any question. And just for the record, guys, that was a question by two callers, Jennifer Wadiki and Daniel Wright. They both wanted to know that question. I have a question by Anais Soares. She says, given how hard he has been going against Debbie Wasserman, I'm wondering if Tim will follow Bernie Sanders into the endorsement ring should he present a contested convention and remain a Democrat rallying. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but you are going to go to Philly, I'm sure, right, Tim?
I'm not going to Philly.
No.
And I've been invited to go to Philly. I've been invited to go to Philly for the Philly FYI to be part of the demonstrations against the convention. I thought about trying to become a Bernie Sanders delegate, and I decided against it.
Okay.
And the God's honest truth is, I haven't left the state in 7 months. I am fixated on winning the race. And, Wasserman Schultz will be up there in Philly. She's in Cleveland this week at the Republican convention. Let her waste her time far away from the district. And every day I'm on the ground working with my team trying to, convert souls to vote for us. And, that's where things are at. I might participate in the Philly FYI, via Skype or some kind of video conferencing in, but I'm going to stay put here on the ground until August 30th.
I understand completely. This question's for me, Tim, and I'm just wondering how it feels. I think it's undemocratic not to have debates. Is that still the case where Debbie hasn't agreed to debate you at all?
She has not agreed to debate me. Back in April, I sent her a letter. I sent it to her campaign headquarters, her Super PAC headquarters, and her DNC office. I've yet to receive any response from her letter. I confronted her in person, and she refused to talk about it. She's been confronted time and again by people in the news media and by ordinary folks videotaping it on their cell phones. And we just made a TV commercial about it that we launched about a week ago, which it's a montage of Debbie's greatest hits. It starts off with Debbie being asked about the value of debates, and she hypocritically says how important debates are in a democracy, and then the rest of the commercial is people asking her if she's going to debate her opponent, and she just runs from the camera each time. I think she won't debate me because, quite frankly, she's afraid. She cannot defend her record on the issues. And, we've talked about payday loans. We've talked about her fundraising practices. We've talked about her drug warrior stances. And that's still scratching the surface. The national news just a few weeks ago was filled with these stories, which is an ongoing crisis here, of the water pollution coming out of Lake Okeechobee, the blue-green algae tide, which is killing everything in its path. I took a trip up there a few weeks ago. When you get near the water, you got to wear a gas mask, a mask over your face because it's so toxic. The manatees are dying, the fish are dying, and you take a look at what has caused this. And it's the big agricultural companies and big sugar companies that have been using Lake Okeechobee as a cesspool for decades, dumping, fertilizer runoff, phosphates and phosphorus and nitrates that are in the water. Some years ago, former governor of Florida, Charlie Crist, came out with a plan for the state to exercise eminent domain, to buy up the sugar plantations just south of Okeechobee, convert it back to marshland, the natural way it was for centuries, for eons, and allow Lake Okeechobee to essentially flow naturally into the Everglades, the river of grass, as it's been called. The marshland, the plant life, would naturally filtrate all that fertilizer, all those chemicals, and it would replenish the aquifer of the Everglades, which is being depleted, which is becoming salinated because of rising ocean levels. And, Wasserman Schultz and a lot of other politicians here in Florida, in fact, Miami Herald had a report last week, over the last 20 years, big sugar companies have given $57 million to Florida politicians of both political parties. And Wasserman Schultz, some of her biggest funders are the sugar magnates, and she's dragged her feet. They all have. They haven't pushed for a solution to this problem, and it's now becoming quite acute. It's getting to the point where the drinking water could become contaminated. And I mean, here in Florida, water is everything to this economy. Now, this is an economy that runs on tourism, on recreation, and then you look at our drinking water. Right. What happens when that all gets polluted? Where do we go? So, these politicians have not been good stewards. They have not taken care of the people. They have not taken care of the planet. They've taken care of themselves, and voters are sick and tired of it.
That's amazing. I guess we already know where Tim stands on fracking. Obviously, he's against fracking. Is that correct, Tim?
Absolutely. That is correct. I'd like to see a ban on fracking, and Wasserman Schultz is kneeling out on it. She refuses to come out and really say where she stands on fracking. And there are folks who want to frack the Everglades here. It's unbelievable.
I'm going to be going, after I go to Philly, I'm going to go to Flint, Michigan to look at the lead poisoning and what's going on now that the cameras left. Looks like I ought to go to Florida instead of going to Flint, just based on what you said.
I'm telling you, this is our Flint, Michigan, and Floridians are mad about it. I would urge everybody who's listening, and you too, to come down here to Florida. I'll tell you, the next 6 weeks here in Florida are going to be so important. I think, for the future of this democracy. If and when we defeat Wasserman Schultz on August 30th, it's going to show that there's no incumbent that's safe. It's going to send a real loud and clear message to the Democratic Party that it has got to reform, or we will pick off these corporate-dominated incumbents one by one, or wholesale in 2018, go after a lot of them. And, we're doing it through the power of the grassroots, through thousands of people contributing just a little bit of their money and their time, and having, a real progressive agenda in common.
I definitely hear you, Tim, and something I'm going to consider. Before I let you go, I do have one constituent I'm sure of who says they live in Hollywood, Florida, so I want to get to them. Her name is Peggy Liddy. She says, I have two concerns with Debbie, and I would like your feedback. Debbie has yet to discuss the Supplemental Security Income Restoration Act, which affects many of us in Broward County. Gosh, it's kind of cut off, but could you explain your position on the Supplemental Security Income?
Yes, I'm so glad to get this question. I got to tell you, last August, I believe, I wrote an op-ed in the Miami Herald on just this exact issue. So the Supplemental Security Income Program was created in the 1970s during the administration of Richard Nixon, and it's administered by the Social Security Administration, and it enhances, it provides a supplemental income to the poorest senior citizens and disabled people in this country. And it has not been updated as far as the benefit levels since it was created in the 1970s. So who's being helped by the SSI program, the Supplemental Security Income Program? Again, the poorest seniors who are living below the poverty rate. That's less than $11,000 a year in income. Seniors and disabled folks. And here, where I am in South Florida, in Miami-Dade and Broward counties, that's 125,000 senior citizens and disabled people live below that poverty line. They need an increase in the SSI benefits. They haven't gotten it. There are seniors who are having to make terrible choices between paying their rent or paying their medical bills. I've heard stories of seniors who are cutting their prescription drugs in half, taking half the dosage just to make it last. And this should be a no-brainer. I mean, with all the billions upon billions of dollars that Congress spends each year in subsidies, and I just mentioned the sugar industry, they get hundreds of millions of dollars a year in subsidies. That this Congress will not act to help the poorest people living among us is shameful. And last year, Senator Elizabeth Warren and Sherrod Brown and Bernie Sanders got behind legislation in the Senate, the SSI Restoration Act, and a companion bill was introduced in the House, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz still has not sponsored this legislation. She can't be bothered. So, across the board, she's not looking out for the interests of real people. There's a jobs crisis in South Florida, all over this country. The New York Times had a piece just a few weeks ago. This millennial generation, people are more likely to be living at home with their parents in their 30s than starting their own families and living on their own. This is an economy that has been stuck in the mud, and when you don't address those issues, I'll tell you, it leads to this kind of fanaticism on the right, the rise of a Donald Trump, for instance. The Democratic Party has got to return to its progressive roots. It's got to be the party of Roosevelt and Kennedy. It's got to be progress for all. That's our campaign model. It's not progressive if it's not progress for all. It's been too long of this trickle-down approach where we take care of Wall Street, we hope it trickles down to everybody else, but it never really does.
Well, look, Tim, I want to thank you for taking time out. You're a very, very down-to-earth guy. We love, I think I can speak for my audience in saying we love how forthcoming you were with all your answers. And folks, you need to find out more about Tim Canova. You need to also consider the fact that, as he states, man, as he goes, we'll go our democracy. I believe it, man. I believe this is a very pivotal race. If Debbie Wasserman can defeat Tim Canova without even having to debate the man, what does that say about democracy? I got to ask you guys, what does that mean? She doesn't even have to defend her record. She doesn't have to even, I can't believe it. Tim, is there any other thing you would like to say before we close up the show?
Well, you identified it. It says it doesn't speak well of democracy when the incumbent doesn't even have to debate the opponent. But think about it. When she refuses to debate and we defeat her anyway, it's going to say an awful lot about the power of the people to step up, to work together for change. And, I would urge anyone who's listening, everyone who's listening, go to the website of this campaign. It's timcanova.com. Contribute a little money if you can, but think about phone banking. There's a link for phone banking right at the top of our homepage. There are folks who are phone banking for us all over the country, and it's freeing up our resources on the ground to do door knocking, to be engaging voters face to face. This is a grassroots movement, not just in how we raise money, but in how we're spending it. We're putting a lot of resources into the ground. And, when we win this on August 30th, it's going to be a great victory for democracy. It's going to be the beginning of a real pushback in this country, I hope.
I love it. I love that attitude. He said, when we win it, not if we win it. He said, when we win it. I love it. Well, look, Tim, thank you so much for taking time out your busy schedule, man. Get some rest. And, brother, we are pulling for you. And you let us know any way we can help spread the word or what we can do to help you.
Well, Tim, you're already spreading the word. And I thank you for everything you're doing. And I hope after we win, after August 30th, that I can come back and we can celebrate on your show.
Hey, man, fantastic. Once again, guys, this is Tim Canova, 23rd District. You guys get out, phone bank, go to the website, contribute to this campaign if you can. If not, volunteer some time. Remember, sweat equity is just as good as money equity, guys. Let's get it in. Thank you, Tim Canova.
Thank you, Tim. Keep the faith, brother.
You got it, brother.
Tim Black. Tim Black. Tim Black. Yes, I am. Truth. Funny. Tim Black. I am TimBlack.com. Tim Black.
Nobody take no cornbread from me.